Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Liderio, and I'm a Customer Success Technical Manager at Let's Go Learn. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to go over on how to interpret your DORA data, your Diagnostic Online Reading Assessment data. Once again, as I said, my name is Aaron Liderio, and I'm actually really excited to be giving this training today. I've actually been with Let's Go Learn for a little over 5 years now, and prior to joining the Let's Go Learn team, I've actually used Let's Go Learn for 2 years prior to joining the team, running an after-school program here in California. So today, to kind of visualize where we're at with our Let's Go Learn implementation, your students should have already finished an assessment window. So we're now moving from the time of students have assessed, and now we're here to look at the data. And we're here to interpret the data a little bit clearer, so maybe we want to set up flexible groupings, or we need to kind of have a little bit more visibility on the strengths and weaknesses of our students. So in order to go over, as far as where we're going today, first we're going to go over a brief introduction of Let's Go Learn. We're going to look at, the diagnostic model assessment, as most of you have already seen. And also, we want to dive in a little bit deeper on each of the individual subtests here at Let's Go Learn. Additionally, we're going to spend a lot of our time inside the system itself. We want to see some of the reporting and also some of the reporting and also some of the considerations when looking at the data. And also at the very end, I will be saving some time to answer any questions that you may have. As I said before, at Let's Go Learn, we always start off with this AI model. And this AI model stands for Assessment and Instruction. And as you can tell from the AI model, as soon as a student is assessed, we use that assessment data to drive instruction. And of course, at a later time, you'll notice that the students will take the assessment again in order to check for understanding and make sure that we can then pivot our instructions to give our students the most appropriate programming possible. Now, you'll notice in this AI cycle, the standards are here at the outside, at the periphery of the cycle. Now, Let's Go Learn, we pay attention to the standards. However, we're not blinded by them. Because where Let's Go Learn comes into play, we are a diagnostic formative assessment. So the question comes into play that being a diagnostic and formative assessment, what is unique about Let's Go Learn? And at Let's Go Learn, we answer those why questions. Why are my students struggling? Or more importantly, why are my students doing so well? When you do have a true diagnostic assessment, it should inform the instruction and where to go next. In everyone's schools, you have many different assessments, norm, reference, benchmarks, and those are all fantastic information. And however, all these data streams should be taken into consideration when we are helping out our students. To kind of bring to light and kind of bring a visualization of the standards model of assessment, I'm using a reading assessment for an example. And you notice that if you give an assessment to a 4th grader, that student will only get that 4th grade band of work. And once again, that information is great because what it shows you is a student is at, above, or below grade level. In contrast, a diagnostic model assessment that's similar to those provided by Let's Go Learn, what we do is we move up and down in each individual construct depending on the student's strengths and weaknesses. So our assessment, what they will do is they will change depending on how the students are doing in the assessment. Now, one of the things that I want to do today is have a little conversation regarding test biases. Every single assessment out there is biased in one form or another, and I want to cover some of those biases in order to better understand other assessments, but also more importantly, to understand the DORA assessment as well. So we'll start off with this assessment that we have here, the MRT, the Metropolitan Readiness Test. And I'm going to quickly go into this test to kind of show it off. So I want each one of you to take a few seconds and look at these pictures that are on this page. And some of the questions you should be asking yourself, is there any biases in this page? Looking at the pictures, some of the common answers that we get is that sometimes students may not know what this picture is. Students may not have a concept of a convertible. Judging from different cultures and religions, this concept of gift giving might be a little bit different, or might be skewed for some students. And more importantly, some of these icons up here, or some of these artifacts, may not resonate with students. Now, I will have to admit this is a quite old assessment. However, to kind of bring this to life, let's look at a more contemporary assessment that's currently offered right now. And this is an example of the SRA. So once again, I want each one of you to take a few minutes or a few seconds to read this passage, and then we'll have some guided thoughts regarding this. So great. It looks like all of you are attentively reading the passage. Now, one of the questions that I always ask teachers when we're doing in-person PD is, in this passage, does anything strike you as hard, or is there anything difficult about what was read? And some of the common consensus that come up is, the word choppy may be a little hard to understand for some students, and also stony looking water. Students may not have a concept regarding this because maybe they don't live near the ocean. But even more fundamentally, when you're looking at this passage, it talks about a student flying over the ocean. Some students may not have a concept of flying because maybe they've never been on a plane. So those are some of the biases that can be seen in the assessment. But also, more importantly, there's a lot of more difficult vocabulary, as I mentioned previously. So when you're really looking at this assessment, this is supposed to be testing reading comprehension, what is it really assessing? Is it reading the ability to read the passage, or is it testing the ability to be able to read certain grade level equivalent words, or sometimes even higher? So you have to take those two things into consideration. At Let's Go Learn, our reading comprehension passages, we actually don't embed grade level equivalency words, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to see, can the students actually read the passages without having vocabulary being a confound? Now, I like to tell a story typically right here about a situation we were in a while back ago. So there was a customer that approached us, and they said that our DORA assessment had some faulty grades. They were saying that the reading comprehension section was way too high for their students. So what we did is we actually looked at the data together. And immediately we did see, yes, the students have quite a high reading comprehension scores. But then we actually asked them a little bit more. And we noticed that a lot of students had an Asian last name. So we asked them a little bit more, and they said, oh, these students, they come from overseas during the summer to learn English. And that brought up a rich, series of questions, because we asked a little bit more about the population. Clearly they were slightly more fluent than a lot of the students that are taking the assessment, and also they've had specific training in English back at home. And because our program did not embed grade level equivalency words, those students were able to read our passages quite well and answer the questions. What that group of students needed a little bit more of is more vocabulary development. Because when you compare our assessment, our reading comprehension section, to others, you do see much different scores. And so that said, I do want to take some time to review each of the individual subtests within DORA, just so that each one of you understands what exactly we are assessing in each one. A lot of you already know a lot about DORA, but just really briefly, DORA is a K through 12 assessment, which is a criterion base. So we're only looking at the individual skills necessary in order for a student to be a proficient reader. Once again, as we saw on the slides previously, it is computer adaptive. So we do move up and down depending on the strengths and weaknesses of the students. But also, the immediate access of student data is really important, because sometimes as educators, we really want to get deep into that data and look a little bit more and look at the data to see, hey, does this coincide with what I see in the classroom? And also, a lot of sites, they like to administer the assessment quarterly, just so that they can see how the students are progressing from a criterion-based reference. And so we're going to go over each one of the subtests today, and we're briefly going to touch on some of the strengths and weaknesses and exactly what it assesses. So all students, when we start the assessment, we have the first three sections are regarding decoding. We have the students read the words on the page. And the very first subtest is high frequency words. And within DORA, this is the only timed measure that we offer. Because by definition, high frequency words or sight words, they should be known immediately. So a student has to be given the word the, and the student should click on the word the quite fast. If a student spends over 7 seconds trying to figure out the word, they will artificially get the question incorrect, although they clicked on the word the. And so once again, they must get the question right in the first 7 seconds. And this is actually based off of the Fry word list. Now it's worth noting that this assessment only goes up to a 3.83, so very late in the 3rd grade, because by definition, your sight words should be learned before you entered a 4th grade. Now, as far as biases on this section, one of the ones that really come into mind is mouse skills. If you are in a mouse environment and some of your younger students, maybe they don't have ability to use the mouse, because nowadays students are learning via, or they're coming into your classrooms with tablet experience, not be able to manipulate the cursor left, right, up, and down may be a detriment to their scores. So we definitely advise them to always, if you have younger kids, younger students, to have them practice the mouse before taking this part of the assessment. After that subtest, the students do word recognition. And this is an untimed measure, and we're trying to figure out if students can read regular and irregular words out of context. Now, as of right now, we're still not concerned if a student understands the meaning of the words. We're only concerned is if a student can read words from a K through 12th grade range. Now, you'll notice that roughly when students get to a 3rd or 4th grade level, these scores jump up quite dramatically. So even though they're in the 3rd grade, they may jump up to a 6th grade level, a 7th grade level, an 8th grade level. And this is because once they've mastered a little bit more decoding, or once it clicks, students are able to read words in a much more efficient manner and then score well above their grade level. After word recognition, we have phonics. And phonics, this subtest only goes from a kindergarten through a 4th grade level. And we're just trying to see if do the students have understanding of basic English phonetic principles of high utility. So we're trying to see, can they read certain words that are real and nonsense words? That is quite controversial, trying to see if they can read nonsense words, because sometimes some people may say, there's no point of that. But in our case, trying to figure out if they can read nonsense words really pins down the student's ability to be able to practice or apply those phonetic principles to words that are not real. And that way we can get to the bottom of their true abilities. The next subtest that's followed is phonemic awareness. Now, I would like to say that this subtest is only given to students that are in K through 2nd, and also students that are older only if they have shown some sort of deficiency in those first few sections that we talked about, those decoding sections. And although this is only a screener subtest, because we only give 7 questions. So we're trying to see, can students isolate and manipulate the sounds of the English language by asking questions of addition, deletion, subtraction, identification, categorization, blending, segmenting, etc. So an example of this would be if you take the out of map and replace it with a what word do you get? And once again, the answer would be tap. And so once again, this is a pre-screener only, and I'll go into this a little bit more further once we dive into the data about what to do next with those kinds of students that maybe are low in phonemic awareness. Now, following that assessment is oral vocabulary. And this is going back to a grade level equivalency that it goes from K through 12th grade. And this actually resembles very closely a picture Peabody test that reading specialists give. And so students have a choice of 4 different pictures, and the students have to pick the picture that closely resembles the oral vocabulary word that is presented to them. Now, I would like to say, however, that you will see some students that are in kindergarten for 2nd scoring relatively high in this measure as well. And this is because since this is oral vocabulary, it does reflect the language spoken at home. So if your students come from a highly oral family, you will see these scores jump up quite dramatically. Now, the next one is spelling. And once again, spelling is a K through 12th grade subtest. And overall, we do see students not doing so well on this assessment, but nationwide, students aren't spelling so well, and that's because students have spell check, spoken text now. So the whole concept of spelling is quite low overall with a lot of students. However, when you do see students with relatively high spelling scores, it does definitely mean 2 things. I mean, students have been exposed to a lot of text over the life. It also means that they have actually quite a good memory. So never always look over spelling, because spelling is kind of an application of the rest of the subtests that we've already talked about. And as always, all roads lead back to silent reading comprehension. Once again, this is a 1st through 12th grade measure. And what we do is we try to see, do the students have the ability to read text and answer 6 questions about that text without having the ability to go back. Now, this is really important because we do hear a lot of times that our a silent reading comprehension subtest is quite difficult. And once again, it's difficult because not only do students not have the ability to go back and reread passages to answer questions, but also all of our text is expository writing, so it's all nonfiction. And sometimes students have a little bit more difficulties grasping nonfiction because you have to remember quite a bit of information. Now, as I mentioned before, we do not embed grade level equivalencies vocabulary within our passages. And once again, we're trying to eliminate vocabulary as being a determinant to figure out a student's true ability, true reading comprehension ability. However, what we do is we use a Flush-Kincaid leveling system. So although we don't use bigger words or more complex words, our sentence structures actually get harder. So they get longer, and we can use compounds and compound subjects, and overall, making them longer and a little bit more difficult to read will change the complexity as the students go from a 1st all the way to a 12th grade level. Now, those questions that we ask, we have 3 factual questions, 2 inferential questions, and 1 contextually based vocabulary question that we ask all the students. And analyzing that data as well, factual versus inferential responses, can give you a good idea of where the students should be and where we can provide some instruction as well. Now, to sum it up so that we can go into our interface, I want to go over some of the subtests as well as some of the common biases that we will see. So once again, in comprehension, the scores can be lower than what you anticipate. And once again, it's because the passages are longer. We use nonfiction passages, and there's no look back. And on the flip side, as our example that the example that I showed you with, or spoke out about our Asian students, sometimes the comprehension scores can be artificially higher, and that's because we do not embed grade level equivalency vocabulary within the passages. Also, as I mentioned, word recognition can be artificially higher, and that's because once students do have the ability to decode words, they will move faster as far as decoding words and also being able to read words. Coming up next is spelling. Nationally, spelling is quite low. However, it is difficult for students to spell regular as well as irregular words because a lot of memory is involved with that and also a lot of practice. And finally, oral vocabulary can be artificially higher, and that's because oral vocabulary develops quickly among verbal families. Now, at this point, instead of looking at some of the reports on this PowerPoint deck, what I want to do is I want to actually dig into one of our demo accounts to model where to go once you have data in your account. Now, if you do have any questions at this point, definitely feel free to ask them in the chat. I will periodically go in there and review the chat just in case if you guys have any questions. But as I said before, I definitely ask any questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into one of our demo accounts right now. And once again, framing this conversation for today, our students have already been entered to the system. Our teachers and our staff have already given the assessment to our students, and they've also completed them. And also, we want to make sure that all of the students have completed an assessment completely. So now, what we're going to do today is we're going to go under assessments, and then we're going to go over DORA, just to go over some of the reports and look at some of the data that we have at our disposal. Once again, this is demo data. So this data may look different than what you see at your site. However, for our purposes, we have some great scores here that I would like to talk about. Now, as I mentioned before, we do use grade level equivalencies with both DORA as well as our ADAM math, which is our math assessment. If at any point you want to learn a little bit more about the subtest, or you want to bone up a little bit more, feel free to click on these little question marks on the top of each header row. And this actually tells you a little bit more about what we talked about earlier today and earlier in this presentation about what each one of these subtests stands for. So once again, you have your high frequency words, word recognition, phonics, phonemic awareness, spelling, vocabulary and comprehension, as well as profile. Now, just for starters, the first thing that I love to do is just look at the data. And when I look at the data, I like to sort it. And even sorting by an individual column can already start opening your eyes regarding the individual students and the individual students' needs. As always, my recommendation for all educators is to bring in your pre-existing information about each individual student. Bring in other measures that you have provided or given to your students over the past months or if not years if possible, and compare it to what you see in DORA. Because what we want to make sure is that these measures do coincide with the students so that we can provide the best instruction for them. So as I said before, always sort by column, because this will open your eyes regarding some of the students that have weaknesses and also some of the students that are doing quite well. Now, what I always love to do, and this is always a fantastic first step when looking at your data, is to group it. And my favorite way to group the data is by going to Display Class Profile here on the right-hand side. Now, when I click on this, what we do here at Let's Go Learn is we place students into specific groups, depending on how they did on decoding, vocabulary, as well as comprehension. And we rank each student as low, or medium, and high. And so this is a fantastic way to see how our students are doing. So you'll notice that the majority of our students, they're in Profile B. And Profile B, as we can notice, is those are students that are low in decoding, medium high in vocabulary, and low in comprehension. So for our fictitious first grade / kindergarten class, the natural first thing to do is to target those decoding skills. Now, to see which students fall under this B, we simply click on the letter B on the far left-hand side of the chart. And when we click on letter B, this actually shows all of the students that fall under that profile. So once again, as we can see, yes, it is in fact, our students did do quite well in vocabulary. And in fact, they are quite low in these first 3 decoding sections. And in fact, they didn't do too hot in reading comprehension, and that's because it says NT. Anytime you see NT for spelling and comprehension, that means the student was not tested. And the reason why we do not test these students in comprehension and reading comprehension and spelling is because you can notice from these decoding scores, it's very possible these students are having just issues reading the words. So we do not want to frustrate the students with spelling and comprehension. And we'll look at a few different higher end students who actually did spelling and vocabulary to kind of put it in perspective. In addition to knowing that information, you also have this little profile that's in the bottom, or this narrative about the student. Now, this narrative is perfect in case if you need to make any custom information or you need to add any information to a student's file. You can definitely feel free to read these to talk a little bit more about what are some of the next steps for these students. Now, still keeping these students in mind about some of these students that are low in decoding, I kind of want to follow this rabbit hole a little bit more and talk about this group a little bit more before we go back. The next step, of course, is to create some sort of instruction that best suits the students. So what I want to do is I want to show you a fantastic report to help you out. So I'm going to open up a new tab right here so I won't lose my point, and click on Reporting and then Teacher. And once again, with this in mind, that this group of students is having issues with decoding, I want to dig a little bit more deeply into this. So after the page loads, what I want to do is I want to go under Summaries and click on the DORA Decoding Error Analysis. And what I want to do is I want to just put in the start date of when the student should have completed the assessment. Once again, since this is an older account, I'm going to have to put in a much wider date. I'm going to just put 2013. I'm going to leave this blank for today. I'm going to just select all students, and then I'm going to just go to Display Report. And what we do in this report is we actually break down the information that we found out about the student within DORA. So if you notice, we actually broken up into phonemic awareness, beginning sounds, and phonetic principles. The negative means the student scored it incorrectly. Positive means the student scored it positively. And NT means not tested. And there's also down here a little key to show you a little bit more about what these figures mean. Now, this actually gives you a fantastic starting point to help out those students. So for example, if we want to look at Corey Brown, let me copy over here. So right here for Corey Brown, now we actually have this quite a rich information regarding where to start. So we can see for Corey, the student's having some issues with basic sounds with L and M and S. You can actually put together some rich decoding interventions based off of this information. And once again, to get to this report, we can go to Reporting, Teacher, and then once the page loads, we go under Summaries, and we look at the DORA decoding error analysis. Additionally, once again, sticking with this line of thought, there's also some pretty cool reports under Response to Intervention Report Selection. Since we're dealing with younger students right now, I'm going to click on this DORA RTI Grade 1, Grade 2 analysis, K1 analysis, excuse me. And luckily, I already have this individual class selected, so I'm going to put in a wide range once again. And what we actually do is we actually place students into different tiers depending on how they did inside the DORA assessment. And so you can also see the total scores with decoding, vocabulary, etc. So this gives you another fantastic report to look at to help out your students. So going back to Reporting and Teacher, I've showed you some great reports to look at for students who are struggling with decoding. And that includes the DORA decoding error analysis, as well as this DORA reading level scores equivalence. Now, so far, we've actually looked at students from a bulk or as a big grouping of students. Also bear in mind, you do have the ability to look at students at an individual basis. So still sticking with Corey, I do want to show you one report, or excuse me, all the reporting features that we have available. For Corey, we have a summary report, parent report, teacher's report, standards report. So I'm actually going to click on the teacher report just to quickly go over it. I'm going to display the full report to kind of see exactly what you should expect from our reports. And before we go in there, let me check if there are any questions while this loads. Okay, no questions so far. Great. Okay, so once this page loads, this is an 18-page report that is made available for you. We customize it with when the student was assessed, what is the date of birth, and also what is the age. We have a fantastic index that profiles what we cover in this report. And then we have a great breakdown of the student's reading profile. So overall, what we're looking for are check marks. So green check marks mean the student scored at or above their grade level. And the red means they have some sort of priority the student needs to address. And down here, one fantastic way to use this report is, or even consulting with the parent as well, for like a parent-teacher conference, is showing the student's current grade and comparing that to how they did in each individual subtest within DORA. And if you go down a little bit deeper, what we did is we actually customized this report for each individual student using how they did on the assessment, and we did create narratives for each individual student. And since we're working with young students really quick, I do want to point out this section under Graphophonics. So this is actually very similar to what we were looking at previously with the DORA decoding error analysis. And this gives you a fantastic ability to quickly show where the student will be working on, and some of the strengths and weaknesses the student had with decoding. At the very end of this individual page, though, as well, is we can actually show you some information of how the student did on the assessment itself. So we see Corey can read words like eat and group. However, Corey read fend for find and poppy for puppy. And we also give you a breakdown of the student's errors. 35% of the errors were real word errors versus 65% were non-word errors. So this brings in a lot of fantastic data, and it starts painting a quite vivid picture of the individual student. So I'm going to close up this report, and I'm going to go back to the assessments, and we'll go to DORA. Now, so far we've been talking about younger students, or also in the application of students having low scores, low decoding scores. So what I want to do is I want to bring up a 7th grade class and do the same thing. I'm going to go to display class profile. And here we do see quite a variety of scores. We have some students who are still A, low across the board, C's, F's, etc. One of the things that I like to point out for older students, and let's take C for example. This student is medium and low in decoding, medium and low in vocabulary, but they're still relatively low in comprehension. Once again, clicking on the letter C will once again show us all the students that fit that profile. Sorry about that. And once again, it gives us some visibility, or gives us a fantastic narrative about what it means to be in the C profile if you're in 6th through 8th. Now, one of the fantastic reports that I like to show in this kind of situation is into the teacher reports again. So once again, going to reporting in teacher, the next step is to kind of figure out where should we go from here. Where should a student move on if they are low in decoding? What I like to do is under summaries, I like to go to the DORA comprehension subtest analysis. I'm going to select all students, and once again, I'm going to select a really wide range. And let me quickly explain this report, because it does offer a lot of great information, especially if you're working with older students and if comprehension is a big factor for them. What we see, it's very familiar. We have the first name, last name. We have their grade when assessed. And also we start seeing some information on how they did on the reading comprehension section. Now, up here, you'll notice it says level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you go a little bit further down to the bottom, we're able to scroll to the right and see the rest of the levels. So we have level 8, 9, 10, etc. These levels represent the individual grades. So this is a 2nd grade passage, this is a 3rd grade passage, etc., etc. And what these numbers represent is a lot of rich data. So let me explain. RT means reading time. So how long in minutes did it take for a student to read the passage? Now this is great information in case if we need to figure out if the student really did try on the reading comprehension section. So we notice that this student read the 1st grade passage in 1 minute, 1.8 minutes. The student read it in 5.7 minutes. So if at any time you see any of this data in red, it's kind of a more or less of a red flag. not to sound too cliche, and that kind of points your attention to those red flags. We don't see any in this page. However, if the reading time was 0.01, then the reading flags will come up. Next one is QT. And QT stands for question. How long did it take a student to answer a question? And instead of minutes, this is actually measured in seconds. So once again, there are 6 questions per passage. And what we do is we actually drop the highest number and take the average of the 5. And this gives us, once again, some great information to see if they're actually spending enough time reading the individual questions as well. Followed by that is percentage correct. So out of the 6 questions, what was the percentage that they got correct? And once again, this is great information to see how they did on each individual passage to kind of gauge how the students are doing. So we have reading time in minutes, question time in seconds, and then also percentage correct. One of the fantastic things that I like to show off as well is this percentage or number of fact errors versus number of inferential errors. Now, this is fantastic to look at this because factual errors means a student may read a passage, however, they can't answer questions from questions straight from the text. So, the question may be, what was the color of Johnny's bike? Well, in the passage it says Johnny's bike was red. And so students are having issues with factual, or they have a high factual errors. That means they're not remembering some of the text that they read. In contrast, inferential errors means students are having issues coming to conclusions regarding the text. So we may ask the students to put 1 and 1 together and make a good conclusion regarding the text. So you'll notice that for this student right here, the student had primarily a lot of inferential errors. So fundamentally, those 2 different groups of students may have different interventions for them, and also depending on what grade level they're actually able to read text at. So once again, to get to this report, you go to reporting, you go to teacher, and then you go to DORA comprehension subset analysis. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention, you do see some NAs here. If at any point we're not able to figure out the exact timing for the student, or maybe they're logging in and logging out quite frequently, we will actually put an NA in order to err on the side of caution. However, in this case, since this is a demo account, there is a lot of NAs because the demo nature of this account. So going back to assessments and then DORA, in summary, we've talked about a lot of fantastic things. We talked about how to check out the class profile report by clicking on the class profile report over here on the right-hand side, and analyzing the student data to see how they're doing. Which profile are the students falling under? Once again, if the students are in this low end where decoding is a priority, checking out the DORA decoding error analysis is fantastic to see the next steps. If your students are having issues with comprehension, doing that comprehension subtest is great to see what kinds of errors students are having. If the students are having problems with vocabulary, we've gone over the individual reports that are found within the assessments and then DORA to kind of have a little bit of visibility on some of the common errors they're having. That way, you're able to take the data and accurately have some next steps. Now, I'll finish up with this. You'll also notice as soon as your students have taken more than one assessment, you notice that there's a little arrow on the right-hand side of the students. If you click on it, you are able to see kind of a historical information for the students. And this is really great because what we want to do is we want to make sure that the students are growing over time. We want to make sure that they're growing, and this actually shows us some historical data of how the student has done overall. Now, you do notice that you have the ability to access those historical reports from this page. In addition, you have the ability to make a gains chart. So what you do is you click on 3 of the assessments that you want to compare, and then you can click on Display Gains Report. And from here, you're able to compare how a student is doing from one assessment window to another. But also, this is a great way to print up or download this report to put into their cumulative folders to show the students are in fact growing. Probably picked the wrong student in this situation. However, you can actually see if the student is growing over time, we can see the bars getting bigger and bigger. You know, as always, we always recommend going to the DORA tab and sorting by each individual subtest to gain a little bit more visibility on the student's strengths and weaknesses. Now, I do want to conclude this data interpretation, and hopefully you've gotten a little bit more information about what exactly we are assessing with each individual subtest within DORA. You know, knowing now what it exactly that we assess, and also some of the limitations and some expectations that we have for each individual subtest. We've gone over some fantastic reports to help you take the next step with the Let's Go Learn data. You know, overall, we do want to thank you for spending your time today with us. And if you do have any questions, I will stick around for a few extra minutes to answer any questions that you may have. However, if you are leaving us today and leaving the webinar, we do want to thank you once again, and you will be receiving a survey at the end. You know, feel free to let us know how we did. You know, if there's anything else that you want us to cover, definitely let us know so that we can improve on these sessions. So once again, on behalf of the Let's Go Learn, as well as myself, we thank you. And definitely feel free to stay behind and ask any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.